I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
Think about the city in which you live. Do you walk across town, or do you get in a car to interact with friends, family, and colleagues? Do you call them on the phone, or is Zoom your mode of connection? Is going out at night an opportunity to bump into a friend or an act of courage to avoid violence? What kind of civic pride do you have? Do you love your neighbors, or do you avoid them? Now reflect on how much your surroundings impacts what you value and how clear you are of what you value. Where you grew up and where you now spend most of your time influences how you relate to people. In short, our surroundings help define us. My next guest deepened her civic pride and intensely focused on what mattered most after 4 events that shaped her adult life. Manchester, England, 1996, the city was bombed by the IRA. No people were killed, but the downtown was destroyed. 2008, like most Western cities, job losses, homelessness, and hunger surged during the Great Recession. 2017, a person blew himself up after the Ariana Grande concert, injuring over 1,000 and killing dozens, including children. And more recently, the lockdown, fear, and isolation that came during COVID. Our surroundings help define us. And Lisa Morton zeroed in on her purpose of leaving a legacy, her value of helping others, and her commitment to developing meaningful relationships. Lisa is the CEO and founder of Roland Dransfield, one of the most established communication agencies in Manchester, England. For the last 24 years, Lisa has worked to forge meaningful, lasting business relationships that create both business growth and social impact alongside her team of award-winning strategists, journalists, creatives, digital and social media specialists. Now with a London office and a partnership with an LA-based agency, Lisa is continuing to expand Roland Dransfield and explore new paths for growth. Lisa's commitment to purpose-driven work is exemplified by Roland Dransfield We Built This City podcast, a podcast series which hears from Mancunians born, bred, and adopted who put the heart into Greater Manchester. The podcast has been nominated for the Best Business Podcast by the prestigious British Podcast Awards that celebrates stories of determination, loyalty, diversity across cultures, arts, politics, sports, music, and business. Roland Dransfield has also won and earned numerous awards. Lisa Morton on the Business of Intuition. Lisa, it's great having you on this show. Would you kind of give our audience what happened to your city back in 1996 and then again in, 2017? I don't think most people sort of know what happened in Manchester, England.
No. So thank you, Dean. Thank you for having it on your podcast. I'm looking forward to speaking to you. So yeah, in 1996, there was a huge bomb, an IRA bomb, terrorist bomb in Manchester, and it blew the whole of the core of the city apart. And miraculously, nobody was killed. The police had had a warning a short time before, so they were able to evacuate that part of the city. But when that happened, we had to rebuild it essentially as a city and a community and build it for the better because it was a very industrial city. So when I started my career in Manchester in 1990, after I'd finished university, you look out the windows and the buildings would be black. It was from the cotton mills, and it was still very much a city which was it wasn't, we now class ourselves as certainly second to London, if not the capital of the UK. Manchester is a lot going on, but then it was a backwater. We didn't retain skills necessarily through the universities based on manufacturing. So there was a real need to create a better city for people, to attract better inward investment, to create better equity in terms of job availability. So at that point in a crisis, I think it's when you realise who the people with the values are and who the people who want to use their platforms for doing good. It's not just those people who want to make commercial gain today. So, just starting my business at that time, not knowing that that was going to happen, suddenly as a PR and a communications agency, we were brought in to help communicate the needs of the city, the asks that we needed from national government in terms of funding to help piece the city back together again, the responsibility and the support we needed from successful businesses, educational sector, politics. So I was just thrust into this. We have actually our motto in Manchester is the worker bee. So there are lots of bees around Manchester, and it's about a hive of, we've always been known as an industrious city. So we were suddenly part of this hive of people and businesses who came together to physically rebuild a city, but also make decisions about how that city could be future-proofed. And it was an honour to be part of that as a young person in a new business. It felt like hierarchies were put aside because it didn't matter how old you were. Did you have the skills and the resources and the intent and the intention to make our city better? And I definitely did. I'm born and bred Mancunian, so that was no chore for me. And I suppose looking back, it put us at a table that we wouldn't have necessarily been at. Then, I got to grips with running a business, and I believe that in times of crisis, as I say, that's when you have to really find what you're made of and what your team's made of. In 2017, we had a horrendous bomb at the Music Arena in Manchester, which so many people go and enjoy music, and it's a big focal point for the city. And a terrorist bomber blew himself up and killed 22 children, young people, parents who were outside an Ariana Grande concert on a Monday night. And that was devastating. And it got at the heart of every single Mancunian, the emotion that created. And again, we then were looking to build a city back, not from a bricks and mortar point of view, but from a hearts and minds point of view, and to stand together as a proud city, to offer support and to listen to those people who had their lives literally blown apart and had lost loved ones. In that time, again, we helped to create some of the charitable forums around that. There was a huge amount of civic engagement, and we just found ourselves again at the centre of that. And that's obviously has ripples now. I mean, we're still working on work and helping groups of people who suffered at that attack. So we have a very big heart as a city. And, at those points where you have adversity, that's where some beautiful, positive progression can come from.
Wonderful. I'm moved by what you just said. I remember once being in Manchester sometime after that first bombing that you just described, and the city had a certain vibe about it, a certain sort of pride about it that I hadn't seen and felt in other cities. And I remember talking to locals about that event, and other parts of the world, you hear things like this happening, but the way you all responded to it was just remarkable. And of course, you had the big recession back in 2008, which of course in the States, we also had something similar. And then you had this awful situation in 2017. And of course, then you get hit with COVID like we all did. And so your city has gone through 4 major events in the last, 30, 25 years.
Yeah.
And so how have all this adversity, because I know that your organization doesn't work just in Manchester or just in that part of the world. You also have a relationship with a firm out of LA and so forth. What has that taught you about relationships and leadership, that adversity? How has that brought forth your ability to connect and serve in a purposeful way outside of the UK?
Well, I think that throughout my whole career, what Manchester and as being embedded in the Manchester business community has taught me is that it is about relationships. I mean, we are built, as I said, talked about, the worker bee. It's an exemplary city or a city region to be a part of in terms of the importance we place on relationships. And we say in Manchester, it's not who you know, it's who knows you.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's interesting that when we have clients that come into the city, say from London or different parts of the UK or the States, we also call Manchester a 15-minute city because you can pretty much walk across the city in 15 minutes. But it doesn't take you 15 minutes. If you've been around in the business community for 25 years, it could take you 3 hours.
Did you bump into people you know and you talk and you chat?
Yeah. So you bump into the new leader of the city council, the chief exec. You bump into a famous footballer who has got 5 businesses that you work with. Charity leaders. That's how we work. We're a network, and so people from outside the city just can't believe it, and they said, no, we really understand. Well, for example, so the business that we work with in LA, Dawn, who's the MD and the owner of that business, her first job was with us at Roland Dransfield years and years ago. And it was her first graduate job. And she was with us a few years, ended up going to LA, smashed it in LA, got involved in an agency. The guy she worked for retired and she took the agency over. And she's been so successful there because, her clients have said, you get stuff done like we'd never see anybody get stuff done here in LA because of that grit, the determination, the work ethic, and the fact that we really understand that you have to don't burn bridges, make friends, don't make it all about you. So I think we're quite a modest city. I think we've got a lot of pride and a big heart, but I think we are very much about how do we help others. So just having that in your DNA throughout your career, we say in our team is that we're constantly looking around to see where can we add impact? Who can we introduce somebody to that actually can move their business or their purpose along? So if that's your mindset, that is going to help you, whatever city, wherever you work in the world.
So what's the biggest difference that you see between those that you work with in other cities, like say LA, versus those that you've known so well in Manchester? I mean, what's the ethic? What's the vibe? How would you say they're different? You've sort of alluded to it a little bit, that grit and that relationship, but what are you trying to teach these other cities in a sense that you have learned from Manchester and your experience there?
Well, definitely have a heart. As a city that's known for its passion, its will to protest against injustices. If you go back through the Industrial Revolution, beyond that into the cotton industry, where we had cotton workers who were striking because even though we're a city built on the cotton industry, we weren't prepared to have cotton brought into the city, which was produced by slaves. So we actually, people starved because of their view that there should be injustices elsewhere in the world that didn't actually directly affect them, but they knew about. So I think that the whole point of having a heart and us using our platforms to do more stuff than just on the desk in front of us. And so I think that's recognised. And I think definitely we put the bigger picture to the forefront rather than literally, focusing on what we can get today out of a situation. It's about legacy creating.
Understood. I'm struck by what you said, that if you started in one end of Manchester, you could walk to the other end if you were not interrupted by anybody that you knew, and it would take you approximately 15 minutes. Most cities within the US, that's not true. I mean, I'm lucky enough if I can get from one end to Phoenix, where we're based, to another end in a car and get there in under an hour. So we are built on a different grid, and our relationships are more intentional versus happenstance. So that in the kind of situations where, say, the states have such disparate and spread out geographies, how do you have that sort of relationship building attitude when we don't just have the ability to bump into somebody? Even now, after COVID, we see so many different organizations are not bringing their employees back, probably because they're afraid of losing them if they mandate that, because we're in such a shortage with labor right now. But that being said, in this world where I can't just run into Lisa going to Starbucks or some other local tea place and we could have a great chat, now I have to get intentional about that. But what's your recommendations about relationship building in this environment where we don't just happenstance bump into each other?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. And what we found in COVID, when those happenstance situations every day, 10 a penny, is that we had to really figure out and advise our clients on how they would maintain those relationships or even create them from a standing point. And it was all about values. And so we found that those organizations who weren't really clear on the values or the purpose they had as a business found that really difficult to do. You know, as you say, if you can meet up for a beer or you can kind of walk across the city together, you're having those meetings that keep reinforce your relationship. We realized that a lot of businesses didn't even know who they were, what they stood for in COVID. And we had reports of people who work for organizations saying, I almost don't even know who I work for. I could be working for anybody, any law firm. I could work for another law firm. It would make no difference to me who I work for while I'm sitting at home on a screen. And it was those organizations who had really figured out who they were, what the purpose was and what the values were that stayed together and got stronger. And I suppose I can use an example of how we navigated that, because values have always been important to me and I have my own values. But when you have people that come through your organization and, you know, they may have come from another organization with a different mindset, or they have an agenda that's different to your own, and egos come to play, it's very easy to get that culture diluted. And we had a situation where, you know, the great intention, I went through what I wanted to scale the business quickly and bring some senior people into the team from lateral hires. We had a great honeymoon period. And then I realized that we were completely off track, to the point that I'd been on a holiday. And when I turned my phone on, when I landed in the UK, it was all hell that was let loose. And I realized that I had to go in. And it was interesting. It was the first day on our brand new, wonderful offices that we'd all been excited about moving into. So I had a very, very, we would call it hey lads, hey meeting with the team. And I said, we're going to work on values. We're going to work on the culture, and you either going to be on the bus or off the bus, because we can't, the values are going to be established and then you'll be measured by the values. And if you don't like it, it's absolutely fine. And if you don't like the fact we're doing this, and you'll be exposed around your ability to come with those values, then get off the bus. And it was a moment in time, really, in terms of my backing myself as a leader. But we did do that process, and we did so much work, which was so positive, around about looking at different organizations' values and culture. So sports teams, charities, other organizations. And we came up with 15 values that we all believed in, or most of us believed in. And the ones that didn't ultimately believe in those, they ended up leaving because they couldn't show up against them.
Quick question here. So you created your own values, your own purpose within your agency. So I want to ask you something more about that in a second. But before I do you also help your clients identify what their purpose is and their values are, following the process that you used internally?
Totally. It's changed the business. Yeah.
It's a fascinating process, because you don't normally consider like an agency like yours would get into that sort of work, you know, and I think it's extremely important. We're sometimes brought in front end to a marketing or advertising agency because they don't have the skill sets to sort of do mission, vision, values, and to build that culture, because of course the culture is going to be what moves the organization forward, as well as those campaigns. So what was your process? How did you get your team to clarify what their values were? And then was it the same process that you used when it comes to dealing with your clients?
Yeah, basically we studied lots of different types of we were loose about it. We just said, like, go away, come back to us, and come back with organizations or charities or people whose values you really admire, and tell us why. So we did that piece for everybody in the team. And the amazing book Legacy by James Kerr, which is about the All Blacks. It was funny because a few people had gone to that, and I would say that it's the backbone of our values, that book and the All Blacks.
Interesting.
And so
I don't know
Yeah.
whether everybody who listens to this is going to know who the All Blacks are. So I just want to,
sorry.
would you just give a quick little side out in terms of what are the All Blacks? I remember once I was in Australia and they were talking about the All Blacks and thinking like, what are they talking about? Is this a racist country? And then I realized it was not that at all. So please describe what the All Blacks are.
Yeah, it's the New Zealand rugby team, and
Yes.
it's the Maori tradition, and so they're one of the most successful sports teams in the world.
Yes.
And they ultimately, their culture is the fact that the performance on the pitch is aligned with their performance in the dressing room and their performance in life. And it's very spiritual in actual fact. They have it, the book's called Legacy because they see themselves that they are wearing that shirt for a period of time. And that when they take that shirt off and pass it on to whoever's going to wear the shirt next, they've left the team in a better place. And so for me, it spoke so much to me because that's exactly how I feel that we as human beings should show up in the world. And it's our responsibility as human beings not to use all the resources around us that we have at our disposal for our gain and to make us feel good. You know, we have to use our resources to create more to help other people who don't have as many. And so, that for me, I felt that the nub of that and the crux of that, if you have that at the core of your business, all the things that distract you from being a great human being, showing up in the world as a great business and a brand, they all fall away because that's what your focus is. So in our values, we've got quite a lot of the All Blacks values in there, and every day we speak about them every day. They're not just on a wall or on a screensaver. They're in our vernacular.
How do you speak about them? Give us an example.
So champions do extra. So we have Champions League every month, and everybody nominates the champion that stood up, that is aligned themselves most of the values that month, and then so they're rewarded, and we have a little bit of a ceremony for them. One of the All Blacks values is sweep the sheds, which I love because it was empowering for the younger members of the team. So sweep the sheds. So the sheds, okay. They're changing rooms. So what they're saying is that what happens is that in an All Blacks game, if they've won on the game and they all celebrate in the sheds together, part of their kind of ceremony is that they allow everybody to leave the shed, and then that team themselves, they clean that shed and they leave it in exactly the way it was when they arrived. So there's no kit man to do stuff. They do it all themselves. And they're as proud of that as they are on their performance in front of the audience, in front of the crowd. And so I love Sweep the Sheds. And one of our younger members of the team said, no job too small. So when we had a situation where a couple of the senior members of the team would have a meeting in the boardroom, and then they'd leave that board meeting and they'd leave their cups and their wrappers and the stuff in there and their papers and expect somebody to go and sort it out for the next meeting. And that immediately overnight empowered the young graduate to say, oi, go back in and sweep the sheds. You're not swept the sheds. Yeah. It's no job's too small. And it's about respect that it's all the small things that are as important as those big wins and those big moments. So that is in our vernacular. And plant trees you'll never see, leave a legacy, out of respect for those who follow. I would say that now that is how we're seen as a business, that our values are our brand, and that people and clients and potential team members come to the company because they know that we're using our platform to plant trees that we'll never see potentially. And I think going back to the first bomb, I feel that we've probably been doing that from day one. We'd not articulated it.
Lisa, I've always wondered, even as a kid, I've been aware that adversity is often the springboard into great things, into clarity and focus and direction and purpose, that it helps focus the mind because, in a sense, it's a survival need in which to do so. And you've talked about how your experience has certainly been one in which has created that focus. There are some who would say, I don't have that sort of adversity in my life. I haven't. And one could say, thank God. wonderful for you that things have not been as horrific as some things that you've just described. Can we create that level of focus around these values that you just described without being fueled by adversity? Can this be a choice, or do we have to do it because it's almost a survival mechanism to do it?
Well, I think the ideal would be to, if you're going to build a business or if you are involved in a business where the values aren't really, really clear, that job is done before you have to get to the adversity piece.
Sure.
I think probably in a lot of cases, that's not the way it works. But if you see organizations who, there's a difference between organizations that don't have clear values and then organizations who have poor values that just aren't stated. And I think we've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years with COVID, so one of my mentor is a business mentor who's an amazing guy. He said to me when we went into this whole lockdown, he said, businesses and brands who add value during coronavirus will be remembered. And those businesses and brands who don't add value during the coronavirus will be remembered. And I thought that's a good point. And it's so true.
Yes.
And, we'll all have examples of businesses and brands who just did not read the room during COVID, either with their customers, with their communities, with their team members, where their tone of voice was wrong. I feel during COVID, we all, because of that adversity, so I think every business has seen adversity now. There's no business really, unless you were doing COVID testing kits, there was no business that was not severely knocked without a toolkit in a lot of cases for what happened in COVID.
Truly.
I think those businesses that didn't go, okay, well, this is great because our values are the fact that we help people around us. We use our platform to do good stuff. Some of our clients, hotel businesses and brands, opened their hotels for NHS health workers for free, looked after them, helped them to create bubbles so they could work together and go to work, fed them. Some of the restaurants that we work with fed vulnerable people for months. So everyone looked at a way, if they were a good organization, creating a legacy, using a platform that they had, they looked at how they could use their privilege to help other people in that adversity, even if they were in adversity themselves and they were in pain. And those businesses are the ones that have gone on to thrive now, that they're doing great. So I do believe that in that case, those businesses that did struggle were, you might be a clothing business that has got a great image. Everybody thinks, this is and we've got examples of that because we're in a fashion manufacturing city. But there were organizations who, although it looked great on the surface, it came to light that they were not paying their supply chain down the line. There were people who'd been exploited, working around the clock, not working in COVID secure environments. That won't be tolerated anymore. So businesses like that just they had poor values. They're the ones that struggled. The businesses that realized that they did have values, they were good organizations, but they hadn't stated and they hadn't got buy-in from their team members or their communities. They also struggled, but they did do the work. And they were the types of businesses that we were working with at the time, where we were saying, you've got a great story. You show up in the world in a good way. You help create communities. You're a good employer. So we work with those businesses to try and help them walk that talk and re-engage their teams to feel that they did know who they were working with and they didn't just go off to another organization in the same sector.
I want to go back to something you said before about values and purpose. How have you helped your team and maybe others go from their values to identify what their purpose is? What's the difference between the two? And how do you create a purpose statement, if you will? Is it a summary of your values? What's your philosophy about purpose?
Yeah, so I would say from a corporate point of view, from a business point of view, the overriding purpose from us, I suppose, it is a value of ours, but ultimately it is about we want to use our platform to create a legacy. But every single team member that comes into our team understands that we're not just about working with an organization to help them communicate their messages. We're about pulling out of that organization how they can impact the world around them. So looking beyond what they do on a daily basis. I don't believe anymore that people care how well you're doing. They care about how well you're doing for other people. And that's the same for businesses and brands. So we do attract very much in the hiring process. People will come to us because they talk about us as a business that helps other organizations find the purpose and the values. And every team member in our team is allowed to come forward to say what they want to do with the platform that Roland Dransfield gives them in their community. So do they want to work with a certain charity, or do they want to have volunteering days? So that's all built into how they perform, and then they're measured on that basically. So we're, as concerned about your performance alongside the values and the purpose of the business as we are about your technical ability and how many ticks you get in boxes you're getting for clients. So, and the other thing that's really important to us as well is that it's made us realize that we only want to work with people who share our values. They don't have to be exactly the same, but they have to be aligned. And I feel that it's given us an ability to protect the team from having to work with organizations or individuals who could potentially exploit them or undermine them or create an environment where we're making them work for somebody that, I wouldn't, as a mother, want my kids to work for.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think sometimes people get stuck in this mindset that we have to take every client that we possibly can versus no, we only take those that follow and align with our values. And that means you're going to have to say no to some and pass up on some really big opportunities because of that. When it comes to your team, Lisa, can you give me an example of how you know when a person is not adhering to your values? And then what do you do when you discover that? So there's a sort of a two-part question.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because when we put the values in place, it meant that we could be objective about behaviors. And it meant that I think a lot of leaders are, you want to be a kind leader, you want to be an empathetic leader, you don't want to be didactic. And before we had the values in place, which created the culture, if there was poor behavior at a senior level, it was difficult to call it out because some of those people just know how to get around that, or they're, if you're an empath, which I am, and you kind of got some narcissists in your team, it's quite complicated to navigate some of those relationships and those conversations. And it can feel subjective and it can feel personal. And the same working with a younger team member who you want to mentor, but the behaviors might not be okay, but they're not disruptive necessarily. They're just not quite aligned, but you don't want them to feel that they're being attacked. By putting the values in place, and I know the team that put the values in place together, we've got some of those team members now. It doesn't matter. It's created a legacy. You can call the behavior out in a really kind or a very practical way by saying, this thing that's just happened, it doesn't align with our value. Leaders create leaders, for example. Or we have one, which is actually from Legacy and from the All Blacks, which is no D-heads, and I won't say it, but you can't be one of those people.
Oh, I understand the word, yes.
What I'm saying, and I don't know what it's, but so, and we say that because, and we use that regularly, because you can sometimes say, am I being one? Maybe I am. Sorry, guys, forgive me, I didn't mean that. But you can't be one of those and walk past it every day when it's on the wall. And you can't be one of those when it's a core value, you call yourself out. So by having all of those values in place, it meant that we could be, no, I don't like that behavior. It's not that, is that behavior is not what we've agreed as a team that we stand by. So it's liberating in respect of that, because you create an environment where we have teammates going, come on, sweep the sheds, or, no job's too small. So you've got that whole vernacular and that narrative going on that's not just for one or two senior members of the team to call out.
So when you say, for example, champions do extra or sweep the sheds or what have you, would you then create a set of definitions about what that means. Like, what does it mean to be a person who does extra? Like examples, almost like a lexicon, so that people go, I understand what the value is, but I also understand the behavior that aligns to that value. Ergo, I know what to do. But I also, as a leader, I know what to look for if somebody is or is not adhering to that value.
Yeah. So, so what we do every single week is that one person in the team, we'll just rotate, one person in the team will identify one of the values that week that they want us to live by. And the following team meeting, we'll kind of till up, we'll cash out, and we'll say, okay, let's have some examples of how that really worked this week. Give some examples of your colleagues who you saw doing extra, and are there any examples of where we didn't really show up there? So we're just learning all the time. And then one of our values is admit it, fix it, move on. And that's not a cop out just to go, we really screwed up there, but hey, let's just, so what, we can all make mistakes. That's on the basis of the fact that very often when you make a mistake and you own up and there's no blame there, you can usually have something that's far stronger and more progressive or more beautiful after you've made the mistake and you've worked on that to see how can we better it. You get a better result. So again, that's liberating for the team because we allow people to make mistakes. There's no blame, but we will encourage people to say, okay, how do you feel you could have dealt with that better? And how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? So it feels like just we're all learning all the time because these values are a living, breathing part of what we do every single day.
I always find that this is fantastic, by the way. I love what you're doing. That value clarification and the behaviors that align to them is often seen as easier to do when you look from a hierarchical perspective. But I've got a position and I have somebody that reports to me. In that position, my role, my responsibility is in fact to help mentor and coach a person who might be struggling with a particular value or behavior that relates to it. Also, it could be that I would hold that person accountable if it seems like it's a continuous problem, which could inform a decision to let them go if that happens. The tricky part is when we find within these hierarchical organizations that how do we then hold our leaders accountable to the values that they in fact have also said we are going to live? And that's where it gets more difficult because you have that power structure that goes on. But can you shed some light on how you have been able to manage that situation where subordinate sees a higher up not living a value? What kind of environment is needed in order for that person to speak up and say what others may be afraid to say?
Yeah, well, we make it very clear to everybody that joins the team. And again, as in terms of the kind of the group work that we do in our weekly values conversations, that the hierarchy that's in place is I suppose not management. The hierarchy in place is in positions only. It's in terms of, that old structure of levels of experience. But we also, as I say, the value is leaders create leaders. We have leaders at all in all ranks of the organization at every level. And we encourage leadership from the day you walk through the door, straight out of school. If we've got an 18-year-old that might start with us, and we had some, we called them Kickstarters through COVID. There's a scheme for very young people to come and work in the organization. And we make it very clear that it doesn't matter how much experience you've got, you can understand values and you can understand behaviors. And within the structure that we have of our values, it's okay. And we encourage you to speak out if you feel that somebody is not aligning, no matter what level they're at, no matter who they are in the team, no matter which client it is or which, say, supplier we're working with. And there's a way of doing that. I mean, you can go and tell a colleague at the same level, or you can come to somebody more senior. And we have a very caring culture. So we never find now, whereas we used to, that there's people sit on stuff and fester on stuff for a long period of time. We have 360 feedback. So we all on our team on a Friday, we all sit around and go, have I been a D-head? Tell me, what could I have done better? How could I have helped you better this week?
So in a sense, you're eliciting, you're encouraging, you're inviting people to share where you have and maybe have not lived in accordance with a value. And I think that what you just said is key, because if leaders don't make that request and cut through the natural tendency not to call out my boss, then it's going to just perpetuate that sense that we are in a hierarchical situation and these values really don't mean anything, certainly on the way from bottom up. It might bottom down, but it loses some of its value for these values if we don't use them across the board. Lisa,
Totally.
What is it? I mean, to kind of finalize my last question for you, and I want to sort of leave it with this conversation. If you were to say, what sort of legacy do you want to leave? What would that be? You're giving the shirt to somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, the All Blacks metaphor. What is it that you hope that you pass on?
Well, I know what I've passed on already in one respect is the fact that, and I'm so proud of, is the fact that in 25 years of the business, we've created so many amazing relationships that we have a whole alumni of people who've worked for Roland Dransfield, who are friends, who've got, you know, their kids are friends. So for me, I know that we've got something right over that quarter of a century. And so that feels to me there's a legacy of lots of very talented people who have come through the company and who have gone on to have their own businesses and do great stuff. So that's really important to me in handing the shirt over. But what I want, and I do think about this, you know, I want people in our communities to feel that, you know, we've been a business that wasn't just about the bottom line, that was more curious about what an entity, what an organization can do, what it can contribute, how it can learn itself, you know, how it can use different iterations and different parts of history, which we've been through, to learn and to grow and to plant those trees. I love what I do. I love communications. I'm nosy, so I love people's stories. I also want to know how those connections, those dots can be created. So for me, if, you know, maybe in another 25 years, I don't know, if we can be look back and think that Roland Dransfield created so many fantastic relationships, which went on to do great stuff in the world, then, you know, that's the legacy I want to leave.
And again, you're going to plant trees that you may never see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lisa, it's been really wonderful to talk with you. Thank you for sharing your story. How can people connect with you?
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. You can get us on at Twitter at RDPR Tweets. I'm on LinkedIn at Lisa Morton, and Instagram, it's at Roland Dransfield. And we're also, we built the City podcast, which is wherever you get your podcasts, and Purposeful Podcasts, again, same way.
Fantastic. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Dean. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.